David, would you just kind of want to start out with like maybe what was going through your mind in the weeks or months that whatever it was that made you want to go to the Jan 6 rally?
I think a lot of people. I mean, obviously, there's 1.5 million people there, arguably, and most of the people there were there to attend a rally, were there to support the president. I think most of us had concerns about the 2020 election, particularly in certain swing states. And I think most of us felt like the courts didn't really address those concerns. Not hearing the case, not bringing the case up to be argued at all, is fundamentally different than hearing a case and ruling against you. And I think it felt to a lot of people like the whole thing was just kind of being bums rushed to completion when there were some serious questions. I know Trump felt that way. And so, they called the rally for January 6th. And I think everybody had the idea that like, this is it. If it doesn't get, if we don't turn the tide at this point in time, then it's done. And so Trump sort of put out the all points bulletin for people to come to DC. So I jumped in the truck and drove up there. My neighbor and I jumped in the truck and drove up there. That was it. That was as much planning as we put into it.
Right on. So you went as Trump supporters, not necessarily like citizen journalists or anything like that.
No, we were Trump supporters. I'm a lawyer. My neighbor has a construction company. He and I have always liked to talk politics and are both Trump supporters. And he was like, I'm thinking about going up. Are you thinking about going up? Yeah, I'm thinking about it. What about you? He said, well, we could ride up together. So that was it.
Right on. Did you guys go to the Ellipse, or were you part of the first group to arrive at the Capitol?
We got to the mall near the monument very, very early in the morning, probably about 6:30, and just walked around a little bit, sightseeing,
right,
chatting. Walked down to the Capitol, had a look at it. That was when I noticed that there was a fence sort of arcing along the west lawn, about 80 yards off of the terrace. And it was a temporary fence. It had signs on it that said restricted area. We were like, okay. Then we turned around, we went back down to the Ellipse. Trump was supposed to start speaking, I think, at about 10 o'clock. He wound up starting at about 11:01. And we stayed until he was completely done speaking. He spoke until 1:11 p.m. And we were there sort of between the Ellipse and the Washington Monument. We couldn't get all the way into the Ellipse, but we were sort of there until he concluded his remarks.
Then you headed towards the Capitol, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we turned around and walked. I mean, and people turned around and started toward the Capitol. I think the media would like everybody to believe that everybody turned around and, lit their torches and grabbed their pitchfork and stormed down the mall toward the Capitol. It was more like a bunch of tourists meandering along the mall and the sidewalks and things like that. I mean, that was about all there was to it.
Right.
And so we walked down there, and when we got down there, both of us noticed that temporary fence was now removed. And so, I mean, I don't know, the Capitol is a long way from the Ellipse, I'd say about 1.5 miles, 1.5 miles, give or take. And so I don't really know how long it took us to walk down there. I mean, we weren't walking at any brisk stride. We were just kind of meandering with the crowd, talking to people, looking around. And when we got close to the west lawn of the Capitol again, we both noticed that barrier was gone. I said something to my neighbor Chad and said, look, man, they pulled that barrier. And when I say it was gone, it was gone. It wasn't trampled down.
Right.
There were no poles. There were no signs. There were no signs laying around on the ground. There was no fencing laying around on the ground. It was gone. Now, subsequently, I've seen some video of some guys pulling it up, and eventually it gets rolled up and like stored off to the side, which is kind of weird. Most rioters don't actually store a fence when they take it down. But But then that was gone. So then we went up to the West Lawn. When we arrived at the West Lawn, it was mostly people singing, chanting, standing around protesting. It was pretty peaceful, pretty cheerful.
At that point, is that when the action, if you will, started happening, or were you very close to a lot of those encounters?
There was a point at which a flashbang landed pretty close to me, like out of the clear blue, and we were both shocked. I was shocked. I didn't necessarily think that the Capitol Police had been the one that deployed it, because there's always people that want to disrupt Trump rallies. People say, was Antifa at the Capitol on January 6th? If they weren't, that's the first Trump rally they ever missed. I mean, Antifa comes to every Trump event there ever was.
Right.
And so this thing lands, and we're like, okay, somebody throw something. Was it the Capitol Police? We didn't know. A few minutes subsequent to that, pepper grenade, orange mist kind of thing landed about 12 feet away from us. The way the wind was blowing, it carried it to where we were. So we got a face full of that. And that was when I can tell you, most of the crowd at that juncture was just shocked. I mean, just like, why are they people were saying, why are they doing this? People were yelling at them like, why are you doing this? And there was a lot going on. I mean, to say that there's any one thing going on, to describe this as other than just really chaotic, and to describe the noise as other than cacophonic, so loud, so rambunctious that it was very hard moment to moment to know what was going on. That's more like what happened. So at that point, after the pepper ball, whatever they call it, pepper grenade, whatever they call them, after that happened, we just moved to the left to just get away from all this, where all this was happening. We moved to the left. We saw a bunch of people walking up the steps, freely walking up the steps. So we walked up the steps. We got to the terrace at the top of the steps, and people are kind of standing around, looking around. Up on the terrace, we're actually sort of north and behind the Capitol Police that are in the center of the terrace, in the center west side. And so we noticed them kind of pull the barriers back, and the Capitol Police and the protesters just kind of walking toward the Capitol. And we watched that. There were some other Capitol Police that were on the Senate stoop. And all of these locations like Terrace and West Side and Senate Stoop, I've learned all of this after the fact. At the time, I knew I was on one side of the Capitol. That's what I knew, I knew it was the Capitol building. I mean, a lot of people called it the White House that day, which shows you, how much planning went into this. But right. I at least knew it wasn't the White House. And so we stood around the Senate wing doors. I now know the name of them are the Senate wing doors. Were open. There was a ramp leading up to them, and people were filing up the ramp going in. Chad went over to the Capitol policemen that were on the Senate stoop and said, hey, can we go in? And they said, and the guy said, I don't know, can you? And so Chad walked over. So we talked about it a little bit more, and we decided that we were, that we came to protest, and we came to make our grievance known by our presence, which is typically how a demonstration or protest works, is your presence speaks for you. And we decided we were curious as to what might be going on inside. We were curious to see whether, Trump had said he was going to go down there. Is Trump inside? Is there anything going on inside? And we talked about it. We said, if there's something going on inside right now, do we want to miss it? We want to get back and find out that we missed something.
Right.
And so we were like, okay, let's go in and take a look. So we walked up the ramp, went inside. There was a civilian. He wasn't a policeman. There was a civilian there waving people in. And we went in that door. We took a right. We walked down the hall to the statutory hall. Then we kept going straight, walked down a hall to the rotunda. We hung out in the rotunda for a little bit. At this point, the Capitol's really filling up. Like people are really pouring in. And so we started saying, how are we going to get out of here? So we decided we might be able to exit down through the visitor center. So we went down there. Okay, well, no exit. Down there, we ran into some Capitol policemen. They said, need you to leave, need you to go. And so we were like, yeah, okay, that's what we're trying to do, actually. You can tell us how to get out of there, be nice. Then we went back to the visitor center. Then we went down toward the house end, the south end of the Capitol people. A lot of people may not realize the Capitol is aligned north-south, okay, with the front door is like the east door and the back door is like the west door. And the Senate wing is the northern chamber and the House wing is the southern chamber. And then the big rotunda is in the middle. Okay, this is also all stuff I've learned subsequent to January 6th, just studying, reading about the cases, reading about my own case.
Right.
Trying to figure out, trying to do what everybody's been trying to do. I think every honest person, I think, has been trying to figure out what actually happened on January 6th.
Right.
And so, we went toward the house, and we came back to the rotunda, like third time back in the rotunda. And then this time we said, well, let's just go back the way we came. So we just kind of fought the crowd and got pretty close to the Senate wing door. But so many people were streaming through the Senate wing door, we could not go out that door. And so somebody outside the window, and the window had been broken, obviously been broken by somebody who broke it. And somebody was outside of the window and reached a hand through it and said, here, you want to come out the window? You can see I was trying to get out. Right. And so I grabbed his hand and jumped out the window. Chad grabbed his hand. We jumped out the window, and then we left. And I think it's very important also for people to understand that, we walked up the stairs and walked through those Senate wing doors at about 2:23. I think Chad went in at about 2:21. And I waited a little bit I waited a minute before I went and see what was going to happen to him,
Right.
And then I went in at 2:23. We were out 29 minutes later at 2:52. I think one of the main things I want everybody in the world to know, at least those that are honest enough to want to know what honestly happened on January 6th, is that all of the violence in the tunnel, what they call the tunnel is the center west entrance to the Capitol. All of the violence you see on the never-ending media loop that they run, with people hitting each other with flagpoles and the guy getting crushed screaming, and that was where, unfortunately, Roseanne Boylan was killed. More than likely is where she was killed. And all of that going to that. None of that started until about 3:00.
Really?
The Senate wing doors were open at about 2:11, according to the FBI. I walked in about 12 minutes after that. People were filing through. Hundreds of people were filing through at that point. And then a lot of the people that went in that time frame turned around and went back out and left.
Right.
And the violence started about 3. The violence really heated up 3:15 and then just kept getting worse, really heated up like 4 to 4:30. So I think there's a narrative out there that says the protesters came and then the protesters fought. And then the protesters went inside. Okay, that's not what happened. What happened was protesters came, protesters went inside, and the fighting started later. For the vast majority of us. Now I've got friends who were in the Center West Terrace who said, yeah, it wasn't like that where I was. I mean, they've got things they saw or whatever. But the Northwest Terrace, the so-called Senate wing doors, most of the people that went in and out of those doors did not know there had been violence at the Capitol that day until they left and saw it on the news. And I was one of those people. Chad was one of those people, my neighbor. John Cameron, good friend of mine, Jay Sixer, who happened to go through that Senate wing door within a few seconds of me. We've met each other subsequent. Talking over X and everything, but he said the same thing. He documented the whole day. He was there as a citizen journalist, right. And he documented the whole day. And when he's at the train station leaving DC, he's kind of like, well, not much happened today. It's just kind of, I don't really know what happened. It was an interesting experience. This is how he's documenting it, because that's how most of us were feeling. It was 2 or 3 days later, I saw all this violence. I saw this this loop. And there was some things, now who knows who it was. I'm not saying I doubt the crowd that engaged in violence was purely any group. I doubt they were purely Jan Sixers. I doubt they were purely Antifa. I doubt they were purely confidential human sources, FBI. If I had to guess, I'd say it's going to be a mixture of all three.
Yeah, I think that's